I wasn't planning to stay in the cabin for more than a week. That was the original idea. I'd been burned out at work, and my sleep had been bad for months. Restless, twitchy, always waking up between 3 and 4 a.m. for no reason. My doctor suggested a change of pace, somewhere quiet, away from screens, from traffic, from meetings. My cousin knew a guy who had a place up north, way out in the woods, about a 30-minute drive from any kind of paved road. It sounded perfect. Just me, a few books, canned food, a generator for essentials, and the forest. The drive up took most of the day, the last part of it. Once I turned off the main road and onto a narrow dirt trail was brutal. My sedan wasn't built for terrain like that. Deep ruts, branches scraping the sides, loose gravel on steep inclines. I had to stop twice to get out and move fallen branches. One time I just barely avoided getting stuck in a patch of mud that swallowed my tires halfway. But eventually I made it. The cabin looked older than I expected. Real wood, not the prefab stuff, and the kind of structure that smelled like damp pine and a little bit of mildew even before you stepped inside. Inside was simple. One bedroom, a tiny bathroom with a composting toilet and a gravity-fed water tank, a small kitchen with a propane stove, and a main room with a wood stove and a few pieces of heavy furniture. It had that musty smell that old cabins get when they're shut tight all winter. The windows were grimy, and the screens were torn in places. But it felt private, remote, and that's what I wanted. The first 2 days went well. I spent time just sitting on the porch, reading, walking through the trees around the place, watching chipmunks dig into the duff layer near the roots. There was a silence there I hadn't heard in years. Not total silence, but a layered stillness. The wind moving through tall pines, distant woodpeckers, the occasional snap of a twig from a deer or raccoon. At night, the darkness was absolute. I could see stars like I hadn't seen since I was a kid. I fell asleep before 9 p.m. and woke up when the sun hit the window. It was working, but the third night something changed. I'd gone to bed just after dark, maybe 8:30. No fire that night, it had warmed up a little and I didn't feel like dealing with it. I lay in bed listening to the soft ticking of the insects outside. It was quiet, peaceful. Then maybe an hour later I woke up. No reason, no sound, just that sharp jolt of consciousness, like my body sensed something before I did. I stayed still in bed, trying to figure out what was different. Took me a moment to notice the quiet. Too quiet. The insects had stopped. I know that might not sound like much, but once you spend a few nights in the woods, you get used to the buzz of bugs, the rhythmic chirp of crickets. That night, nothing. Total silence. I sat up, pulled the curtain aside, and looked outside. Just trees and blackness. I didn't see or hear anything. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tried to write it off. Maybe the temperature dropped suddenly or something scared off the critters. It's not like I was a seasoned outdoorsman, but I stayed awake for another hour, just listening. Eventually, the sound returned. A slow build of bugs and the distant hoot of an owl, and I went back to sleep. The next day, I walked farther than before, about a mile down an old logging trail. I carried bear spray, wore boots, kept a steady pace. I found a small clearing and sat there for a while, just watching the trees. Everything felt normal again. The silence from the night before started to feel like a trick of my tired brain. But that night, it happened again. I woke up just after 1 a.m., same feeling. Alert, wide awake, no sound outside. This time I got out of bed, put on my shoes, and walked into the main room. I stood near the front window looking through the glass. Still nothing. I leaned in, peering past the reflection of the lamp I'd turned on. That's when I saw it. It was far off, maybe 50 yards into the woods, but there was a figure, just standing there. At first, I thought it was a tree, something oddly shaped, or maybe a deer caught in a weird pose. But the longer I looked, the more I could tell it wasn't an animal. It was a person, standing still. No flashlight, no movement, just there. I backed away from the window, heart racing. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of the night? There were no neighbors nearby, no trails that passed through here. I turned off the lamp, crept into the bedroom, and grabbed the bear spray and the axe I'd used for firewood. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I walked out to where I thought I saw the figure. There were no clear tracks, mostly pine needles and hard ground, but I found a spot where the moss had been disturbed, like someone had been standing there for a while. Not a bear, not a deer, too round, too flat-footed. I didn't see anything else. No boot prints, no litter, no broken branches. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever it was, had been watching me. I considered leaving that day, but part of me didn't want to overreact. Could have been a hunter, maybe someone lost, maybe even a trick of the eyes. I didn't see any signs of forced entry. My car was untouched. I stayed, but I kept the axe nearby that night. The following 2 days were quiet again. Nothing unusual during the day. At night, the forest sounds continued uninterrupted. I started to relax again. I stopped thinking about the figure. I even chopped more firewood and cleaned out the water tank. The air smelled like fresh dirt and wildflowers. On the 6th night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. Again, no sound. I knew the pattern by now. I sat up and immediately felt that same alertness crawl through my skin. I stayed still. The window by my bed was cracked slightly. It had been warm, and I could hear my own breath. I listened. There was a creak on the front porch. Soft, deliberate, then another. I got out of bed slowly, heart hammering. I didn't turn on any lights. I crouched beside the wall in the main room and listened. There was movement outside. Shuffling. A quiet knock against the wood paneling. Not pounding, more like testing, tapping. I held the axe in both hands, my palms slick. The bear spray was clipped to my belt. I was frozen. I didn't want to step in front of the window. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. The sound moved toward the side of the cabin. Slow steps in the pine needles. I moved with it, keeping low. There was a small window near the sink. I peeked up and saw a shadow move past. Human height, broad shoulders, no flashlight, no gear, just a shape moving silently along the side of the building. They circled the cabin once. Then again, I heard the back door rattle. It was locked. I triple-checked that before bed. Still, the knob turned slowly, then stopped. More footsteps. The front porch creaked again. Then silence. I stood there in the dark for what felt like an hour. I never heard them leave. Eventually, I crept back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise. When the light finally came, I walked outside. There were boot prints on the porch. Size 11 or 12, maybe. Deep treads. They led to the steps, circled the cabin, then vanished into the woods. No tire tracks, no campsite nearby, just prints. I packed my gear in a hurry. I was ready to leave, but when I went to start my car, the battery was dead, completely drained. That made no sense. I hadn't left the lights on. The dome light was still functional when I'd unloaded the day I arrived. I popped the hood. No obvious damage. I checked the terminals. Secure. I tried again. Nothing. There was no cell signal up there. I'd known that coming in. I had to make a choice. Stay one more night and hike out in the morning, or start walking immediately. I loaded a small pack, grabbed a knife, the bear spray, water, and food, and started down the trail toward the nearest dirt road. It was rough going. The trail was steep in places, washed out in others. My nerves were shot. Every sound felt like something coming up behind me. I made it about 4 miles before I reached a small crossroads where my cousin had told me a gas company sometimes left supply trucks. I waited there until a truck actually came by, almost 3 hours later. The driver didn't say much, but he let me ride in the back and dropped me off near town. I called a tow company the next day and gave them directions. They found the cabin. They found my car. The driver told me the battery had been disconnected. Not drained, physically unhooked. That was the last time I went out there. I never got an answer about who had been near the cabin or why they were watching me. But I know what I saw. I know someone had been there, watching, waiting, moving quietly through the woods at night. And I know, more than anything, that I was not supposed to see them. I needed a break from everything. The year had been packed with noise. Constant deadlines, emails, city traffic, phone calls that never stopped, and the buzzing in my head that never seemed to shut off. I was worn out in a way that sleep didn't fix. I wanted real quiet, the kind you could only get deep in the woods. So when I found a cabin listing on a small rental site that looked just right, I didn't think twice. It was about 4 hours from where I lived, tucked into the northern edge of a national forest. The photos showed a small A-frame cabin, weathered wood, a tin roof, a fire pit out back, and dense pine trees all around it. The listing said it had no Wi-Fi and spotty cell reception. That sealed the deal. I packed enough food for 5 days, loaded up the back of my SUV with water, camping gear just in case, a hatchet, a folding knife, and a backpack full of books I hadn't touched in years. I left early, hoping to beat traffic out of the city. The drive was long but quiet, and the roads got narrower and rougher the closer I got to the forest. The last hour was all dirt road, winding through trees and hills. I passed a couple of old trailheads, but no houses, no cars either. When I finally reached the turnoff the host had given me, I almost missed it. There was no sign, just a faded orange flag tied to a sapling. The track that led to the cabin wasn't much more than ruts in the grass. I drove slow, letting the suspension do the work, until the cabin appeared through the trees like something half-forgotten. It looked just like the pictures, small, solid, and lonely. It sat back from the track maybe 30 feet, with tall trees pressed in close on all sides. I shut off the engine, stepped out, and just stood there for a while. There was nothing, no wind, no birds, just silence and the faint ticking sound of my cooling engine. Inside, it was simple. One room, wood floors, exposed rafters, and the smell of pine and dust. There was a little kitchen with a propane stove, an old sink that drew water from a hand pump out back, and a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in a while. A narrow staircase led up to a sleeping loft with a mattress on a wooden platform. No bathroom, just an outhouse maybe 20 yards down a worn path behind the cabin. I dropped my stuff, opened the windows to air the place out, and sat down on the porch with a beer from the cooler. That first night, I didn't do much. I built a fire out back, ate chili with crackers, and listened to the trees creak and whisper above me. There were no stars, too cloudy, but I didn't care. Felt like I'd stepped out of the world. The second day, I hiked a few miles into the woods. No trails, just me and the map I'd printed. The forest was dense, full of old trees and tangled brush. I didn't see a single person, which was perfect. I wanted to feel small again, the way you do when the world isn't shaped for people. That night, it rained. Hard. I sat inside with a lantern, reading an old paperback, listening to the storm hammer the roof. I couldn't get warm, even with a blanket and a second pair of socks. I figured the place just held cold when it rained. Around midnight, I heard something outside, a kind of thump, like a log falling over. I sat up and listened, heart knocking a little. Then another thump, closer this time. Not fast, not rushed, just a dull impact, like someone stepping onto the porch. I turned off the lantern, sat in the dark, waited. The rain drowned out everything else, and after a while, I told myself it was a branch falling, or the wind knocking something loose. I didn't check. I just stayed still until I got tired and went to bed. The next morning, I found a trail of muddy footprints on the porch. Not animal, not boot prints either, bare feet, human-sized, long toes. The mud had dried in patches. Whoever it was had walked straight up to the cabin and stopped just outside the front door. No prints going sideways, none going off the edge of the porch. Just there, then gone. I stood staring at them for a long time. There was no one around for miles. I hadn't seen a single car since the forest road. The host said it was remote with no neighbors. And even if someone had wandered this deep in, why barefoot? In the storm? At night? I looked around the trees for signs of someone watching, but I saw nothing, just thick green walls all around. No movement, no sound, but the feeling I had that someone was there clung to me like fog. I tried to forget it, cleaned the porch with a broom, went back inside, read some more, ate a peanut butter sandwich. But that night, it happened again. It wasn't raining this time, but I heard something outside just after 11. First, it was twigs snapping. Then the sound of something brushing against the side of the cabin, like a shoulder dragging along the boards. I turned off the lights again, heart punching the inside of my chest. I sat in the loft, clutching the hatchet I'd brought, staring through the gaps in the railing at the door below. Something walked around the cabin. Slowly. Once. Twice. I heard it crunch over pine needles and then pause. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door again. No knock. No sound. Just standing there. I didn't move all night. By morning, whoever or whatever it was had gone. I opened the door just after dawn, half expecting to see another set of footprints. But the ground was dry. No prints. No sign. But something had been there. The empty beer bottle I'd left on the porch railing was gone. Just vanished. I didn't go hiking that day. I stayed close, walked the perimeter of the clearing, checked the outhouse, looked for signs. I found something near the back corner of the cabin. Not a full print, but a partial one, pressed into a patch of moss. Deep, barefoot again. Too long. I couldn't tell if it was made by a man or something else. The big toe was longer than it should have been. That afternoon, I kept thinking about leaving, but something in me refused. Pride, maybe, or denial. I didn't want to be the kind of person who got scared by footprints, so I stayed. Told myself I was imagining things. Told myself it was a drifter or some local screwing around. That night, the sounds started earlier. Right after sunset, maybe 8 p.m. Movement in the woods. Branches cracking. The creak of something stepping slowly across the clearing. I turned off every light. Sat in the corner by the fireplace with the hatchet and the knife. I had one of those big survival flashlights with a strobe setting, and I kept it in my lap, ready. The door was locked, but it was old. Just a latch and a bolt. Around 9, something stepped onto the porch. I could hear the boards creak. I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the door. Then I heard it move to the side window. Glass rattled gently. A shape passed by, too dark to see clearly, but it was tall.
Taller than me.
Maybe 6.5 feet. Bare shoulders? Couldn't tell. I waited. Didn't breathe. Didn't move. It circled again. This time, when it got behind the cabin, I heard the outhouse door creak open. Then shut. Then nothing. I sat there until morning. When the sun came up, I checked the outhouse. The door was half open. Inside, the smell was stronger than usual. Something had smeared dirt all over the walls. Or mud, but it didn't look like just mud. It was too dark and it stank. Like iron. Like rot. That was it. I packed everything into the car in 10 minutes flat. I didn't clean up. I didn't lock the door. I just left. On the way out, I passed a small game trail I hadn't noticed before, maybe 50 yards from the cabin. There were markings on the trees. Scratches, deep like someone had dragged a tool or claws along the bark. I didn't stop to look closely. I didn't feel safe until I hit pavement again. Back home, I didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I even say? That someone barefoot stalked my cabin at night and smeared blood? Or something like it. All over the outhouse? That I heard them breathe outside my door for hours? People would think I was crazy, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. For weeks, I woke up at night thinking I heard someone on the porch. I started locking every door, every window. I couldn't sit in silence anymore. It reminded me too much of that place. I emailed the host a week later, just to ask if anyone had been reported missing out there or if other guests had said anything strange. They never replied. I checked the listing again a few days later. It was gone. No trace of it. Not even in my browser history. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't know if it was a person or some freak living off-grid or something else entirely. But it watched me. It waited, and it wanted me to know it was there. I haven't been back to the woods since. I think about it sometimes. How quiet it was. How peaceful it seemed at first. But peace like that isn't free. Something always lives in the silence. You just don't always see it right away. And sometimes when you finally do, it's already too late. I needed a break from everything. City life had started feeling like a bad habit I couldn't shake. Loud, crowded, always on the move. I was tired of traffic, tired of people, tired of the constant hum of things I wasn't even part of. I just wanted to be alone, for once. So when I found this small listing for a cabin up north, buried somewhere in the woods near the edge of a state forest, I booked it without thinking twice. It wasn't a rental site or anything mainstream. It was a plain website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2003. Just a few low-res pictures of a plain wooden cabin and a paragraph that said something about off-grid peace and quiet. No reviews, no flashy branding, but that's what I wanted. I packed up some gear, just enough clothes, a hatchet, some camping food, a propane stove, a solar lantern, a knife I always took hiking, and a few gallons of water. The cabin had no running water or electricity, so I came prepared. I printed out the map the owner sent me because there was no cell service that far up north. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just enough to keep it responsible. My coworkers thought I was going to the beach. My neighbor figured I was visiting family. The drive took almost 9 hours. The last 2 were rough, unpaved roads that looked more like dried riverbeds than anything meant for a car. My little sedan groaned and scraped a few times on rocks, but I managed to make it to the edge of a clearing where the tree line broke and the roof of the cabin finally showed itself. It was even smaller than the pictures made it seem. A single-story log structure with a crooked front porch, like someone had tried to fix it once but gave up halfway. The door had no lock, just a heavy wooden latch. Inside, it was one open space, a cot with a thin mattress, a table and 2 chairs, a wood-burning stove with a pile of logs beside it, and a few open shelves holding old supplies, rusty canned goods, some cracked plates, a dusty oil lamp that still had a bit of fuel in it. A small window on each wall let in light, though barely. You could see daylight, but not much of anything else. I dropped my gear on the floor and took a long breath. The air smelled like pine and damp wood. I stayed busy that first day, unpacked, cleared out some cobwebs, tested the stove, and collected some kindling. I didn't plan to use the stove for cooking unless I needed to. I had packed enough fuel for my little burner to last 4 or 5 days. The first night was cold and quiet. Not just quiet, but hollow, in that deep way woods get when there's no wind, no bugs, no movement. I had a sleeping bag and a wool blanket, but I still shivered through the night. I woke up maybe 4 or 5 times. Every time I opened my eyes, I saw nothing but black outside the small windows. Even with the lantern flickering, the dark pressed in. I kept telling myself that's what I came for. Silence, stillness, solitude. The next day, I walked out past the tree line to explore. There was a narrow trail that led up a slope behind the cabin, probably made by deer or other animals, not people. I followed it for about half a mile until the trees thickened and blocked out most of the light. I didn't want to get turned around, so I marked my path with broken sticks and scratches in the bark. I saw no one, heard nothing except the occasional crack of a branch, probably squirrels or birds, though I didn't see them either. That evening, back at the cabin, I was boiling water for a freeze-dried meal when I noticed a deep gouge across the wooden table. I could have sworn it hadn't been there yesterday. It looked recent, the edges were sharp, and there were a few curled wood shavings still clinging to it. I touched it, clean cut, straight, deep, not the kind you'd make by accident. I thought maybe I just missed it before. I hadn't exactly studied the furniture. That night, I slept even worse. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard a sound that jolted me out of sleep. A thump, not loud, but clear, like something hitting the wall. I sat up and held still. Nothing moved. The lantern had gone out hours earlier, so I was blind in the dark. I waited, ears straining. Nothing. I told myself it was a branch falling or maybe a raccoon bumping into something outside. In the morning, I circled the cabin. There was nothing on the ground. No fallen branches, no animal tracks. But I did find a set of small, straight scrapes along the side of the cabin. 5 lines, vertical, no more than 6 inches long. They looked like claw marks, but they were too clean, almost like someone had used a tool. I didn't know what to make of it, so I did nothing. I wasn't ready to let some weird marks ruin my break. The third day, I hiked again, this time heading in the opposite direction, trying to reach a small lake the map had shown. I got lost. The trees looked the same in every direction, and my markings had worn off or vanished. I ended up walking in circles for almost 2 hours before I found a clearing I recognized. I cursed under my breath the whole way back, exhausted and tense. Something about the forest felt off that day. The silence was too still. I kept expecting to see something between the trees, movement, a flash of color, even another person, but there was never anything. That night, while eating dinner, I heard footsteps outside. Not animal sounds, these were human, crunching slow through the dry leaves, stopping every few steps. Then nothing. I stayed frozen, listening, heart thudding. I didn't have a gun, just my knife and the hatchet. I slid both onto the table in front of me and sat in the dark, straining to hear. The footsteps didn't come back. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I was ready to leave. I packed everything, checked the car, and realized I had a flat tire. Not just low, but shredded, cut right through the sidewall. I hadn't hit anything that rough. It looked like it had been slashed. I checked the spare. Still good. I swapped them quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. I couldn't prove it, but I knew someone had done it. Someone had been out here. I couldn't leave right away. The road was too rough to drive at night with just the spare on. I didn't want to risk damaging it and getting stranded for real. I had to wait until morning. I didn't go back in the cabin. I dragged my gear out to the car and sat there with the doors locked and the knife in my lap. I kept the key in the ignition. Around midnight, I saw a shape at the edge of the tree line, just standing there, still, tall, maybe 6 feet, maybe more. Couldn't see a face. No flashlight, just a dark silhouette watching. I turned on the headlights and blasted the horn. The figure moved quickly, smoothly, back into the trees. Gone in an instant. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just sat there, engine running, foot on the brake, headlights aimed at the forest. When the sun came up, I drove out. I didn't stop. The car bumped and scraped the whole way down that awful dirt road. But I didn't care. I didn't breathe easy until I saw pavement and cell signal. When I got back to the city, I called the number on the cabin listing. Disconnected. I checked the website, it was gone. Just a white screen and an error message. I even checked the address with the county records. No owner listed. No structures on the land. Just empty forest. I still think about that place. About whoever or whatever was out there. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was a person. Someone who knew those woods, who watched that cabin, who waited. Maybe they lived out there full time. Maybe they just came around when they saw someone pull in. I don't know. I never saw their face. Never heard a voice. Just silence, cuts in wood, and that shape in the dark. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not alone. And if I ever need a break from the city again, I'll just check into a cheap motel with noisy neighbors and a broken ice machine. At least I'll know who's on the other side of the wall. We planned the cabin trip a month in advance. There were 5 of us, me, Josh, Eric, Matt, and Dylan. We'd known each other since high school, but now we were all scattered in different cities, jobs, and routines. The cabin trip was supposed to be a way to reconnect, drink a little, hike, and just relax away from everything. Eric's uncle owned the cabin. It was deep in the woods, upstate, not far from the Canadian border. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just a narrow gravel road that cut into the forest for what felt like miles. The cabin itself was old but well-maintained. A small place, just 1 story, with a wraparound porch and a wood-burning stove in the middle. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a big common area where we planned to crash on couches and air mattresses. We got there late Friday afternoon. The sun was dipping behind the trees, and the temperature dropped fast as we unpacked the SUV. Everything felt normal. We were laughing, giving each other a hard time, tossing bags around. We brought too much beer, too little food, and we forgot things like batteries and bug spray. It felt like every other trip we'd done, just a little colder and quieter. That first night was easy. We sat around the fire pit, passed bottles around, and told the same dumb stories we always told. I remember the sound of the woods was constant. Leaves rustling, distant cracking branches, and the occasional owl. The woods were so thick we couldn't see more than a few feet into them at night. Even with the fire going, the darkness felt heavy, like it was pressing in from every side. Around midnight, we killed the fire and headed inside. The cold hit fast, and Eric worked the old stove while we rolled out sleeping bags. There were no curtains on the windows, just darkness reflecting the inside back at us. I remember staring at the glass above the sink while brushing my teeth and feeling like someone could be watching from just outside. But that's just the woods. Your mind plays tricks. I slept lightly that night. The old place creaked a lot. The wind ran hard through the trees, whistling and rattling the windows. I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps outside, but every time I listened hard, it was just wind and branches. I chalked it up to nerves. I wasn't used to being this cut off. The next morning, we were slow to get moving. No one had slept great. Josh had a headache. Dylan said he heard something walking around outside around 3 a.m., but figured it was an animal. We made eggs, drank terrible instant coffee, and decided to go for a hike after lunch. The trail behind the cabin led uphill into deeper forest. The trees got thicker fast, and the light dropped even though it was early afternoon. The trail was marked by orange ribbons tied to trees, but it didn't feel like anyone had used it in a while. Every so often we'd stop, listen, and all we could hear was the wind high above and the occasional chirp of birds. We hiked for maybe 2 hours. At one point we found what looked like the remains of an old tree stand, wood rotting and broken, nails rusted through. It was eerie how quiet it was. No planes, no distant traffic. Just the 5 of us breathing and crunching through underbrush. We turned back once the sun started to dip. The way back was slower. Eric thought we'd taken a wrong turn, but after a few tense minutes of checking tree markings, we found the right path. When we made it back to the cabin, it was just starting to get dark. The whole place felt colder, and none of us said much while lighting the stove and starting dinner. That night, something changed. It's hard to explain exactly what, but the mood was off. Matt was acting weird, quiet, jumpy. He kept glancing out the windows. When I asked if he was all right, he just shrugged, said he felt like we weren't alone out here. It wasn't like him. He was usually the loudest guy in the room. Later that night, we were sitting in the common room when we heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Not the wind, not an animal. Clear, heavy footsteps. Slow and deliberate. We all froze. No one said a word. We just stared at the door. The footsteps moved from one side of the porch to the other, then stopped. Eric grabbed the fireplace poker. Dylan picked up a flashlight. We waited for what felt like forever. Then Eric cracked the door and flashed the light across the porch. Nothing, just empty space and cold air. He stepped outside and looked around while the rest of us watched from the doorway. Still nothing. He came back in, shut the door, and we locked it. All the windows too. We didn't hear anything else that night, but no one slept. Every creak made me sit up. Every gust of wind had me staring into the dark, waiting for another sound. By morning, we were all wired and tired. Matt wanted to leave, said he had a bad feeling. The rest of us tried to talk him down. I wish we'd listened. We spent that day sticking close to the cabin. No more hiking. We played cards, tried to laugh it off, but the tension never really left. Around late afternoon, Eric noticed something. One of the logs from the firewood pile was sitting on the porch, out of place. It hadn't been there the night before. We all went out to look. The log wasn't just moved. It had a deep gouge in it, like someone had taken a knife or hatchet and dug into the bark. It didn't look accidental. It was deliberate, centered, clean. We searched around the cabin. No footprints, no signs of anyone. But the ground was packed hard and dry. Whoever did it wouldn't have left much. We started making jokes to cover the unease, but no one really believed them. Eric got serious and pulled out the pistol from the locked box in the bedroom. He didn't wave it around or anything, just kept it close. That night, we agreed to keep watch. 2 of us awake at all times, rotating in shifts. I took the first shift with Dylan. We sat by the front window with the light off, eyes on the porch. Nothing moved for hours. No footsteps, no strange sounds. Around 2 a.m., Josh and Matt took over while we tried to sleep. I woke up to the sound of Matt shouting. I sat up fast, heart pounding. The lights were on. Josh was by the door, holding it shut with his shoulder. Matt was yelling at him to keep it closed. I ran over, asking what happened. Josh said someone tried to open the door. Not knock, not jiggle the handle. They tried to walk in like they had a key. When he jumped up, the door was already swinging open. He slammed it shut and saw a shape running off into the woods. We were done after that. No one argued. We packed what we could in 10 minutes and piled into the SUV. We left trash, food, everything. The ride down that gravel road felt endless. Every turn I kept expecting someone to step out of the trees. We didn't talk much until we hit the highway. Then the questions started. Who the hell was out there? Why didn't they just knock? Why try to come in without a word? Back home, we told people it was probably a hunter or some loner living off-grid. But none of us really believed that. Not deep down. Eric called his uncle and told him what happened. A week later, his uncle drove up there to check the place. The door was unlocked. Nothing stolen. But someone had left something on the kitchen table. An old, rusted hunting knife. No note, no blood. Just the knife sitting perfectly straight in the center of the table. We never went back. That trip changed things. We still talk, but we haven't all been together like that since. There's an edge now, a line we crossed that we didn't mean to. Something out there knew we were alone, knew we were vulnerable. It didn't need to hurt us to get into our heads. It just had to show us we weren't as far off the map as we thought, that we weren't as safe as we liked to believe. And the worst part? We never saw their face, never heard their voice. We don't even know if it was just one person. That kind of unknown doesn't fade. It just waits, quiet in the back of your mind, until the next time you find yourself somewhere dark, somewhere quiet, somewhere off the grid, and you start wondering if someone's watching you again. We planned the cabin trip to get away from everything. My family had been going through a rough patch, and the idea of isolating ourselves in the woods for a few days felt like the reset we needed. It was me, my wife, our 2 kids, and my younger brother, who had been living with us temporarily after a job loss. The cabin belonged to a distant relative who barely used it, so we figured it'd be perfect, cheap, quiet, and surrounded by forest. The drive took most of the day. As we climbed deeper into the hills, cell service dropped off, and paved roads gave way to dirt and gravel. The trees grew thicker, pressing in close to the road, and the last few miles felt like we were leaving the modern world behind. When we pulled up to the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. The structure was older than I expected. Weathered wood, sagging porch, rust on the hinges, but it looked solid enough. There were no neighbors in sight, just forest in every direction. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A single-floor layout with a small kitchen, a living room with an old wood stove, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. Everything smelled like dust and old pine. The water ran slow but clean. There was electricity from a generator, but we planned to use it sparingly. We unpacked, lit a fire, and tried to settle in. The first night passed without incident. We played board games by lantern light and listened to the wind in the trees. It was peaceful. That's what I remember most from the beginning. How quiet it was. No cars, no humming appliances, no city sounds. Just the forest. The next day we explored the area. There was an old trail that looped through the woods behind the cabin. We followed it for a while, but the kids got tired, so we turned back early. Along the way, we passed remnants of old hunting blinds, fallen trees, and patches of mushrooms. My brother wandered off at one point, said he thought he saw a deer, but he came back empty-handed. The trail was rugged and overgrown in places, like no one had used it in years. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up, and the trees creaked like something walking around just out of sight. I got up to check on the kids and stood by the window for a while, watching the dark tree line. The fire in the wood stove had burned low, casting a dull orange glow across the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. I told myself it was just nerves, city instincts not used to the silence. In the morning, we noticed footprints around the cabin. They were faint but unmistakable boot prints, not from any of us. I checked everyone's shoes just to be sure. The prints led from the tree line to the porch and back again. I told my wife it was probably from the last person who stayed here, maybe a hunter or a hiker. Still, I walked the perimeter and checked the locks. My brother seemed off that day. He said he hadn't slept well either. He spent a lot of time standing on the porch, staring into the woods like he was trying to see something. I asked if he was all right, and he just nodded. Later, I saw him writing something in a notebook. I didn't know he kept one. When I asked about it, he put it away quickly and changed the subject. On the third day, the kids found a dead squirrel nailed to a tree near the trail. Its body had been split open, and its insides were gone. They came running back to the cabin crying. I hiked out to check and found it exactly like they described. There were no other tracks around it, no sign of a predator. It looked like someone had done it on purpose. I took it down and buried it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Around midnight, the generator cut out and the lights went dead. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the fuel. It was empty. I was sure it had enough for another day. We'd been careful with it. I refilled it from the spare tank and restarted it. But the thought of someone siphoning it off in the dark kept me on edge. In the morning, my brother was gone. His bed was empty, his shoes were missing, and so was his coat. I followed his footprints into the woods. They went down the trail for about a quarter mile before veering off into the underbrush. I called out, but there was no answer. After an hour of searching, I went back to the cabin. We waited all day. I wanted to go into town for help, but the car battery was dead. I had checked it the day before. It had been fine. Now it wouldn't turn over at all. I opened the hood and saw that the cables had been cut. Clean, deliberate cuts. Someone had done it during the night. We were trapped. That night was the worst. Every sound outside felt deliberate, too regular to be wind or animals. At one point, I heard footsteps on the porch. I sat in the dark with a knife, waiting, not breathing. Nothing happened. No knock, no noise. Just the slow creak of the boards as something moved past the window. The next morning, there was a small pile of rocks arranged in a circle on the porch. In the center was my brother's notebook. The last entry was a short line written hastily. Something out there is trying to make me part of it. I don't think I can stop it. That was it. I opened the notebook to earlier pages. Most of it was rambling, strange drawings, paranoid scribbles, notes about trees moving or whispers in the dark. Nothing made sense. I didn't want to read more. I spent the day trying to get the car working. I stripped wire from inside the cabin and managed to reconnect the battery cables with crude splices. By late afternoon, the engine finally turned over. I told my wife and kids to pack everything, fast. We left that evening. I didn't wait for darkness. I didn't wait for more signs. I just drove until the trees opened up and cell service returned. I called the police and gave them everything, coordinates, the story, even my brother's notebook. A search was launched, but they never found him. No body, no footprints beyond what I saw. It was like he vanished into the trees. They chalked it up to mental illness, said he might have wandered off and succumbed to the elements. But that didn't explain the cut cables, the squirrel, the rocks, or the notebook being returned. They had no answers. Back home, we tried to move on. My kids still ask about their uncle sometimes. My wife avoids talking about it altogether. I keep the notebook in a locked drawer. Sometimes, late at night, I reread it. I try to find meaning in the chaos. But mostly, I remember the silence of those woods. And I never stop wondering if something was watching us from the trees, something human, or something pretending to be. I'd always thought the idea of getting away from it all was a nice, simple pleasure. A cabin in the woods, a bit off the beaten path, was supposed to be peaceful, a little break from the chaos of life. I'd rented it for the weekend, just myself. No distractions, no schedules. A place to unwind and enjoy the silence of nature. But the cabin, nestled among towering pine trees, didn't offer the solace I expected. Felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Dust particles danced in the sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked in. There was nothing inherently unsettling about the place, but it had a sense of neglect, like it had been abandoned just long enough for nature to start creeping back in. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the isolation of the location. The cabin was supposed to be rustic. Anyway, I put my things down by the small fireplace in the living room, a couch, an old rocking chair, and a small kitchen off to the side. Simple, but something in the silence unnerved me. I'd planned to relax, maybe read a book, take a nap, but there was a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. Instead of diving straight into relaxation, I found myself pacing around, opening cupboards, inspecting drawers, anything to keep myself busy. I opened the fridge, empty except for a single jar of pickles, some dried up salad, and a bag of chips. I thought I might be able to make something from the pantry, but I found it almost as bare as the fridge. There was a can of beans, a box of rice, a few cans of soup. It wasn't much, but I decided to make do. I heated up a can of soup and opened the bag of chips. The crisp sound of the bag was oddly loud in the cabin's silence. I couldn't help but think how strange it was to find that bag of chips. Not exactly gourmet food, but it seemed out of place in a cabin so old and seemingly neglected. As I opened the bag, the smell of stale oil hit my nose, and I hesitated. I tossed a few into my mouth anyway, the crunch breaking the silence in a way I almost didn't like. I sat at the small dining table, staring out the window as I ate. The view was gorgeous, with thick woods stretching far beyond the cabin, and the sun starting to dip behind the treetops. It looked like the kind of scene you'd find on a postcard. Yet, there was an eerie stillness. Not a single bird chirped, no rustling in the trees, just quiet. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, no phone service, no connection to the outside world. I tried to push down the growing sense of unease that had settled over me, telling myself it was just my nerves. After all, who wouldn't feel a little off being alone in a place like this? As the evening grew darker, I cleaned up the soup can and tossed the empty chip bag into the trash. The thought of having a snack at that moment made me uncomfortable, but my stomach growled. I figured I could make it through the night with something simple. I moved to the small cupboard by the kitchen, my fingers brushing the worn wood. I scanned the shelves, looking for something more to eat. A few cans of soup, a box of crackers, and then, tucked behind them, a small bag of dry jerky. Pulled it out. The bag was cheap, the kind you could pick up at a gas station, and had an almost faded label that read beef jerky, original flavor. It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it would do. I tore open the bag, the scent of smoked meat filling the room. As I chewed, I looked out the window again, watching the last traces of daylight disappear. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, the kind of wilderness that felt untamed, unexplored. It should have been beautiful, but instead, it felt unnerving. I was about to head to bed when I heard something. At first, it was faint, just a small crack, like the sound of wood snapping. I froze, listening harder. The sound came again, this time closer. My heart skipped. I stood up slowly, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. The woods outside the cabin were thick, too thick for the light to reach far. I looked out the window, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, but I knew I'd heard something. I thought I might have imagined it, maybe an animal in the woods or the house settling. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned off the light and sat back down at the table. The quiet was so thick I could almost taste it. I picked up the bag of jerky again, mindlessly chewing, though I wasn't hungry anymore. I felt like I needed something to do, something to distract me from the unease that crept up my spine. I ate the jerky slowly, the taste growing more unpleasant as I ate. Each piece seemed chewier than the last, like it was fighting me. The texture, once tolerable, was now just wrong. It wasn't until I reached for another piece that I realized something strange. The jerky bag was heavier. I hadn't eaten that much. I opened it, feeling around the inside, but there was no more jerky, just small, sharp bits that felt wrong against my fingers. I took the flashlight again, casting it on the small pile of remnants inside the bag. The light revealed something dark, something that didn't belong. There were tiny, insect-like legs scattered across the remnants. My stomach churned. I shook the bag, and as I did, a strange crunching sound came from inside. I dropped it in a panic, watching as the contents spilled onto the table. A dark, oily substance leaked out with the debris. The smell of rancid meat filled the air. It wasn't just jerky, it was something else, something rotten. I stood frozen, staring at the pile. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind raced. How could I have missed it? How could I have eaten something that wasn't normal? My stomach turned, the urge to vomit rising in me. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking. As I shone the light back across the table, my eyes scanned the room, searching for something. Anything that could explain what had happened. And that's when I saw it. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to shift, moving in a way that wasn't right. A form, large, hulking, and far too still, was crouched behind the old armchair. For a moment, I thought it was an animal, maybe a bear, but it didn't make sense. The thing was too large, too silent. A rush of adrenaline hit me, my heart hammering in my chest. Without thinking, I grabbed my things and bolted out the door. I didn't look back, didn't stop to check if it was following me. I just ran, the cold air hitting my face as I pushed through the woods, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the branches that scraped against my skin. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I found myself at a small road. My chest was tight, my breath shallow. I flagged down a passing car, and within minutes, I was speeding away from the cabin, far away from whatever it was that had been watching me. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in that cabin. I don't know what happened in there. I don't know what I ate. But whatever it wasn't meant for human consumption. And I'll never forget the feeling of being watched from the corner of that room. Something was waiting for me in that cabin. Something I was never meant to find. The cabin was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a place to get away from the noise of the city and spend a quiet weekend in the woods. I found it online, advertised as the perfect spot for a solo retreat. Secluded, tucked away in the thick woods, with no neighbors for miles. It sounded like exactly what I needed, a break from everything. I wasn't prepared, though, for how unsettling it would turn out to be. When I arrived, the place looked just as it had in the pictures. Small, rustic, and old. The kind of place where you could get lost in your thoughts, away from the distractions of modern life. The front porch creaked when I stepped onto it, and the door opened with a slow groan. Inside, everything smelled faintly musty, but there was a warmth to it, a comfort that made it feel lived in. I set down my bag and started unpacking, the weight of the day lifting off my shoulders. There was a crackling fireplace in the corner of the room, a couch that had seen better days, and a simple kitchen area. The cabin had a homely, worn feel to it, but not in a bad way. It was cozy, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. After a long drive, I wasn't about to let my mind wander too far into thinking there might be something strange about the place. I noticed it right away, though. There was something odd about the air in the cabin, something off. It wasn't just the mustiness or the silence. It was the way the stillness seemed to press in from all sides. Every noise I made echoed slightly too much. Even the sound of my own breath felt louder than it should have been. I brushed it off as nerves. Being in the middle of nowhere, all alone, would do that to anyone, I thought. I went about my business, getting some firewood from the pile outside, making dinner, settling into the rhythm of the night. But the longer I was there, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had just finished eating when I first heard the sound. It was faint at first, just a distant scratching, like something pawing at the ground. I stood still, listening hard, but the sound stopped as quickly as it had started. I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a squirrel or a raccoon, but I didn't know if there were any in the area. I told myself it was nothing and went back to relaxing, but deep down, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, as I lay in bed, the sound returned. This time it was closer, a slow scraping, followed by a soft, almost inaudible whine. I held my breath, straining to hear. There it was again. A dog. Maybe? I wasn't sure. The sound seemed to come from outside, but it was so quiet, so faint, that it almost felt like it was coming from inside the cabin. I lay in the dark, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or some other animal. But there was something unsettling about the noise. Something about the way it sounded like it was right outside the window, like it was waiting. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed the flashlight from my bag, and slowly made my way to the door. I stepped outside, my breath puffing out in the cold night air, and shone the light toward the trees. There was nothing there, just the same dark, empty woods. No dog, no animal, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I breathed a sigh of relief and turned to go back inside, but that's when I saw it. The dog. It was standing just beyond the edge of the cabin, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. At first, I thought it was just a stray, but something about the way it stood, so still and unmoving, sent a shiver down my spine. Its eyes gleamed in the flashlight's beam, cold, unblinking, and too wide. The thing that caught me off guard, though, was its size. It wasn't the size of a normal dog. It was massive, its body hunched low to the ground, muscles rippling under its fur. It looked like it had been abandoned, dirty and ragged, but it didn't seem to move. It just stood there, staring at me. I should have gone back inside, locked the door, and pretended like I hadn't seen anything. But something about the dog made me freeze. It wasn't just its size. It was the way it stood there, completely motionless, watching me. There was a tension in the air, a kind of pressure, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. The dog's eyes followed me, never blinking, never shifting. I didn't know what it wanted, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I backed up slowly, one step at a time, keeping my eyes on the dog. And then, just as I was about to turn and go inside, it made a sound, a low growl deep in its chest. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I felt a chill run through me, but I didn't dare turn my back on it. I stepped back inside the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I locked the door. I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. They were too wide, too intense, like it was watching me for a reason. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a stray dog, that I was overreacting. I didn't want to let it ruin my trip. But when I lay back down in bed, the same sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't just the dog. It was the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone in that cabin. The rest of the night was a blur of fitful sleep and half-waking moments. I kept hearing sounds, scratching at the door, the soft patting of paws outside. But when I looked, there was nothing there. No dog, no animal, just the silence of the woods. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. I went outside to gather firewood, to try to shake off the fear, but as I stepped into the woods, I felt eyes on me again. I didn't dare turn around. I just kept walking, deeper into the trees, until I reached the small clearing where I had planned to gather the wood. I heard it before I saw it. The low growl again, that rumbling sound from the night before, but this time it was closer. I spun around, and there it was, the dog. It wasn't standing still anymore. It was walking toward me, its eyes locked on mine. The growl deepened, becoming a warning. I backed away slowly, feeling the panic start to rise in my chest. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was the way the dog moved, so deliberate, so calm, like it knew it had me cornered. But I stayed still, trying not to show fear, even though my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Stopped a few feet away from me, still growling. And then, it did something I wasn't expecting. Sat down, still staring, still watching me. There was no anger, no sign of aggression in its posture, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a mistake. That was when I realized that this dog wasn't like any animal I'd ever encountered before. It wasn't just stray or wild. There was something intelligent in its gaze, something that didn't belong in the woods. I turned around, my breath coming in sharp, quick gasps, and started walking back to the cabin. The dog didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me the whole way back, watching, waiting. When I reached the cabin, I didn't look back. I locked the door, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed inside for the rest of the day. The dog didn't return, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there, just beyond the trees, waiting. By the time the sun started to set, I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things, drove off the property as fast as I could, and didn't look back. I haven't returned since, and I don't think I ever will. I don't know what that dog wanted or why it followed me, but I know one thing. I'll never forget the way it looked at me, the way it watched, as if it had all the time in the world. And it wasn't afraid of me,